In the 7th century, the Byzantine Empire stood as a beacon of power and culture, a direct descendant of the mighty Roman Empire. But despite its immense strength, it was increasingly vulnerable. The world around it was changing rapidly, new threats were emerging from the east, and long-standing enemies were growing bolder. The most menacing of these threats came from the expanding Arab caliphates, who had already swept across North Africa and were now eyeing Constantinople, the heart of Byzantine civilization. At this time, the Byzantine Empire was ruled by Emperor Constantine IV, a leader facing a monumental challenge. The Islamic expansion was threatening to consume all in its path, and the Byzantine navy, once the pride of the empire, had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. In 674 AD, the Arabs, under the command of Caliph Muawiyah I, laid siege to Constantinople itself. The city's fortifications were impressive, but they could only do so much against an enemy that could surround it from the sea. The Byzantine Empire's survival depended on its ability to defend itself from the might of the Arab fleet, an imposing force that seemed impossible to defeat. In this desperate hour, Byzantine engineers and alchemists began to work in secret, driven by the need to create a weapon that would change the course of naval warfare forever. The weapon they developed would be so destructive, so fearsome, that its very name would become synonymous with both mystery and terror: Greek fire. Its exact composition remains a closely guarded secret to this day, and the knowledge of how to create it was lost to history when the empire fell. But the legend of Greek fire, which could burn on water, would forever be etched into the annals of military history. The task at hand was enormous. The Byzantines needed something that could hold the line against an enemy whose naval forces far outnumbered their own. They needed something that could create havoc and destruction at sea, crippling the Arab fleet and turning the tide of the war. The invention of Greek fire wasn't just about military tactics, it was about survival. The fate of Constantinople, and with it the future of the Byzantine Empire, rested on this new weapon's success. As the Byzantines scrambled to develop Greek fire, their enemies in the Arab fleet pressed on. They had laid siege to the city, surrounding it with their ships, blocking the Bosporus and making any attempt to break the blockade almost impossible. The Byzantines, though resourceful and determined, were forced into an increasingly dire situation. Food and supplies were running low. Constantinople, however, had one advantage: their well-fortified walls. Yet, even the greatest fortifications in the world would not hold up against an overwhelming naval assault. The empire needed a weapon that could keep the enemy at bay, one that could strike from the waters in a way that no other weapon had done before. The early phases of the war against the Arabs were filled with tension and uncertainty. The Byzantines knew that their very existence was at risk. In the back alleys of the city, behind the imperial walls, teams of engineers and alchemists toiled away. Their task was not just difficult, it was revolutionary. They needed to find a substance that could burn at sea, something that could not be extinguished by water. It was a task fraught with danger, as many of the men working on the project understood all too well that failure would mean death, not just for them, but for the empire they were trying to save. Historians often debate the exact ingredients of Greek fire, but most agree that it was a blend of highly flammable substances, likely including quicklime, sulfur, and petroleum-based substances, mixed with secret binding agents. The Byzantines carefully guarded the recipe, and those who knew it were sworn to secrecy under penalty of death. The weapon, once perfected, was placed into special tubes and used in a variety of ways. It could be shot from siphons mounted on ships, hurled by hand in pots, or even launched from a small, handheld device that resembled a modern flamethrower. Greek fire was a weapon of terror, one that could set ships ablaze and leave the enemy helpless against its burning fury. When Greek fire was first used in combat, it had an almost mythical effect on the Arabs. In the siege of Constantinople, the Byzantines unleashed their new weapon for the first time in a battle that would decide the fate of their civilization. The initial impact was staggering. Arab ships, once confident in their ability to conquer, were suddenly caught off guard by the ferocity of the Byzantine weapon. The fire burned on the surface of the water, jumping from ship to ship, consuming everything in its path. The Arabs, who had relied on their naval superiority, were helpless in the face of this new and terrifying weapon. They had never seen anything like it before. As the flames spread across the sea, the Arabs were forced to retreat. The Byzantine navy, though smaller, had struck a devastating blow, turning the tide of the siege. The emotional impact of this victory cannot be overstated. For the Byzantines, who had been on the brink of defeat, Greek fire was nothing short of a miracle. It had saved Constantinople, and perhaps the entire empire, from the jaws of destruction. The weapon's success was a turning point in the siege, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter in Byzantine military history. But Greek fire's success came with a heavy price. The Byzantines, while celebrating their victory, also realized the enormous responsibility that came with their new weapon. It was a weapon of immense power, capable of causing destruction on an unprecedented scale. It could win battles, but it could also destroy everything in its wake. The emotional weight of this weapon was felt deeply by those who had created it. They had crafted something that could tip the balance of power in their favor, but they had also unlocked a force that could consume their own civilization if left unchecked. As the siege of Constantinople continued, Greek fire would play a critical role in defending the city. The weapon would become the key to the Byzantine Empire's survival against the relentless Arab onslaught. The emotional stakes were high. For the empire's defenders, every victory felt like a triumph over fate itself. Yet, with each passing day, the threat of the Arabs grew, and the tension in the city mounted. The weight of history hung heavy on the shoulders of the Byzantine people. They knew that this weapon could be their salvation, but it could also be their undoing. The weapon's introduction into the war represented a massive shift in the balance of naval power. The use of Greek fire had not only secured Constantinople for the moment, it had redefined naval warfare. The weapon's sheer terror and effectiveness left a lasting impression on both the Byzantines and their enemies. For the first time, the outcome of a battle could be determined not just by the size of the forces involved, but by the technological innovation of one side. This was not just a battle for survival, it was a battle for the future of an empire. And as the Byzantines looked out over the horizon, watching the smoke of the burning Arab ships rise into the sky, they knew that they had unleashed a force that would change the course of history forever. What had once seemed like a hopeless struggle for survival had turned into a victory that would define the Byzantines as masters of military innovation. Yet, despite the triumph, the dark shadow of what Greek fire had unleashed loomed large, and its legacy would remain a source of both awe and fear for generations to come. As the siege of Constantinople raged on, the Byzantine Empire found itself at a crossroads. The mighty forces of the Arab Caliphate, led by Caliph Muawiyah I, were pushing relentlessly toward the heart of the city. The Byzantines were well aware that without a breakthrough, their ancient empire was on the verge of collapse. They needed more than just defense. They needed a weapon that could shift the tides in their favor, a force so overwhelming that it could stop the enemy dead in its tracks. The solution to their desperate situation would come in the form of an invention that would shake the foundations of military warfare: Greek fire. The creation of Greek fire didn't happen overnight. It was the product of years of experimentation, secrecy, and a dangerous blend of science and alchemy. It was a weapon born out of necessity, crafted by Byzantine engineers and alchemists who had no room for failure. The urgency was palpable. Constantinople was not only the capital of the Byzantine Empire but also the key to its survival. If it fell, the empire would fall with it. The stakes were high, and every hour spent in the workshop was a gamble that could either save or doom the empire. The secretive development of Greek fire took place in the depths of Constantinople's imperial workshops, isolated from the eyes of the enemy. The Byzantine government entrusted a select group of scientists and engineers, many of whom were drawn from the diverse pool of talent within the empire. Some were Greek, others were Syrians, Armenians, and even Persians, people who brought their knowledge of various disciplines to the table, creating an intellectual melting pot that would be crucial in the development of the weapon. The task was nothing short of extraordinary. Greek fire had to be a weapon that could both destroy the enemy and stand the test of time. It had to be usable on the sea, as the Arab fleet was its most immediate threat, but it also had to be manageable and portable. The Byzantines needed a weapon that could be launched from their ships, but it had to be easy enough to store and prepare in bulk. It needed to burn relentlessly, even on water, where most flames would be extinguished. In addition, it had to be a closely guarded secret. If word of it leaked out, the Byzantines would risk their technological edge being countered by the Arabs or others in the region. The urgency of this task was underscored by the escalating conflict outside the city's walls. The Arabs, with their superior numbers and overwhelming naval strength, were not simply seeking to defeat the Byzantines, they were aiming to wipe them off the map entirely. With each passing day, the siege tightened, and the morale of the Byzantine defenders began to wane. The Emperor, Constantine IV, was under immense pressure from his generals and his people to provide a solution to the crisis. The creation of Greek fire became his last hope, his ace in the hole. At the heart of the weapon's design was a burning liquid that could be projected with incredible force. The secret ingredients remain a subject of debate to this day, but it is believed that the Byzantines used a mixture of substances such as sulfur, quicklime, and petroleum, along with other chemicals, that combined to create a volatile and persistent fire. It was not just the chemical composition that made Greek fire so effective, it was also the ingenious delivery systems the Byzantines created. They fashioned specialized siphons, devices that could project the fiery liquid onto enemy ships with devastating accuracy. The weapon could be deployed from a variety of platforms, from ships to handheld pots, each delivery method designed to ensure maximum destruction. To understand the impact of Greek fire, it's important to consider the military context of the time. The Arab fleet was one of the most formidable in the world, with ships that were fast, numerous, and equipped with skilled sailors. The Byzantines, by contrast, had been outnumbered and outclassed for years. Their ships were fewer, and their naval capabilities had diminished. The development of Greek fire, therefore, was not just a new weapon, it was the game-changer that could level the playing field. The Byzantines, for all their courage, could not have stood up to the Arab fleet without it. The secrecy surrounding Greek fire's formula was integral to its success. Those who worked on its creation were sworn to secrecy, bound by a code that demanded they never reveal its composition. Many of the engineers and alchemists who contributed to its development vanished mysteriously once their work was done, ensuring that the weapon's secrets would remain hidden. This cloak of mystery around Greek fire only added to its mystique and its psychological power. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of Byzantine ingenuity, a technological miracle that could defy the odds. When Greek fire was finally deployed in battle, it had an immediate and profound impact. The first successful use of Greek fire in naval combat came during the siege of Constantinople in 674 AD, when the Byzantines used it against the Arab fleet. The Arabs, confident in their superiority, were caught completely off guard by the ferocity of the weapon. As the Byzantines launched their siphons and pots of Greek fire, the flames spread across the water, incinerating the Arab ships in a terrifying display of power. The fire didn't just burn the ships, it melted their wooden hulls and destroyed their crews. The Arabs, helpless in the face of this terrifying new force, were forced to retreat. The psychological effect on the Arab fleet was profound. For centuries, naval warfare had been a matter of skill, numbers, and brute force. But Greek fire introduced an entirely new element: terror. The Arabs had never encountered anything like it before. Their ships, usually symbols of power and dominance, were now vulnerable to an unstoppable force that could obliterate them in moments. The Byzantines, though vastly outnumbered, had turned the tables. Greek fire was no longer just a weapon, it was a psychological tool, one that exploited fear as much as fire itself. But the use of Greek fire wasn't without its challenges. While the weapon proved devastating to the Arabs, it was also dangerous and difficult to control. The Byzantines had to be incredibly careful in its deployment. It was volatile and could easily burn its users if mishandled. The chemical ingredients were so powerful that they could backfire if the wind shifted or if the flames spread in unexpected directions. Additionally, the secrecy surrounding the weapon meant that it could not be mass-produced on a scale that would allow the Byzantines to fully dominate the seas. While Greek fire was a powerful tool, it wasn't a panacea. It couldn't solve every problem, and it certainly couldn't win every battle. The emotional weight of Greek fire's creation was felt deeply by those who crafted it. The engineers, who worked tirelessly under the threat of failure, knew that their invention could either save the empire or lead to its destruction. They were acutely aware that the weapon they were making was not just a military tool. It was a symbol of the Byzantine Empire's struggle for survival. If Greek fire succeeded, it would secure the future of the empire. If it failed, it would mark the end of the Byzantines as a power in the Mediterranean world. The fear of failure was ever present, but so was the hope that this weapon could turn the tide. As the Greeks and Arabs clashed in battle after battle, Greek fire became the key to Byzantine success. It was more than just a weapon. It was a testament to the ingenuity, courage, and determination of a people on the brink of extinction. Yet, the invention also carried a heavy burden. A weapon that could save an empire could also destroy it, if not handled carefully. The creation of Greek fire was, in many ways, a symbol of the paradox that defined the Byzantine Empire itself. A civilization caught between glory and decay, between innovation and desperation. The Siege of Constantinople, 674 to 678 AD, was one of the most pivotal moments in Byzantine history, and it would become the stage on which Greek fire would first demonstrate its incredible power. The city, the heart of the Byzantine Empire, stood as the last bastion of Christian civilization in the eastern Mediterranean, surrounded by enemies on all sides. The Byzantine defenders, though vastly outnumbered, had to hold their ground against an Islamic caliphate that had rapidly expanded its territories and now sought to capture the prize of Constantinople. At the heart of the siege was the Byzantine navy, a force that, despite its diminished state, was still capable of inflicting serious damage. The Arab fleet, under the command of the Umayyad Caliphate, was a force to be reckoned with, fast, well-equipped, and brimming with soldiers. The Byzantine defenders, however, had one critical advantage that would change the tide of the conflict: Greek fire. The Arabs, confident in their superiority at sea, thought they had the Byzantines cornered. They had successfully captured large parts of the eastern Mediterranean, and Constantinople, the jewel of the empire, seemed like the next logical target. The siege began with an intense naval blockade, as Arab ships surrounded the city, cutting off trade, supplies, and reinforcements. With the walls of Constantinople holding firm, the fate of the city, and the empire, now lay in the hands of its navy. In these early days of the siege, the Byzantine defenders were on the back foot. Their fleet was smaller, their resources dwindling, and morale was dangerously low. The Byzantines had tried several desperate tactics to break the blockade, but they were unsuccessful. The Arab ships, using superior tactics and numbers, seemed to be on the verge of victory. Yet, amidst this dire situation, a small group of Byzantine engineers and alchemists had been working feverishly in secret, crafting a weapon that could change everything. A weapon that would not just destroy ships but would instill fear into the hearts of those who witnessed it. Greek fire was that weapon, and when it was finally unleashed, it would send shockwaves throughout the entire Mediterranean world. The Byzantines had created something no one had ever seen before: an incendiary weapon that could burn even on water. Greek fire was a liquid fire, capable of igniting and spreading across the sea, consuming enemy ships with an intensity that was unimaginable. Once unleashed, there was no stopping it. The fire burned relentlessly, fueled by the mixture of chemicals within it, and it could not be extinguished by water, making it a terror both at sea and on land. When Greek fire was first deployed against the Arab fleet, the results were nothing short of catastrophic for the invaders. The Arabs, who had believed they were invincible, suddenly found themselves at the mercy of a force they could not understand or combat. The Byzantines, using specially designed siphons mounted on their ships, launched the liquid fire at the Arab vessels with terrifying accuracy. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the Arab ships in flames. The once proud fleet, which had surrounded Constantinople with such confidence, was now in disarray. The Arabs, who had never encountered such a weapon before, were paralyzed with fear. Their ships, caught in the raging inferno, were burning from the inside out. The fire didn't just damage the ships, it melted them. Wood, the material most ships of the era were constructed from, burned so fiercely that the very structure of the vessels was compromised. Crews who attempted to fight the fire found that there was no way to control it. The fire clung to the ships, spreading with the wind, and soon the once mighty Arab fleet was reduced to a mass of flaming wreckage. The psychological impact on the Arab forces was immediate and profound. They had come to Constantinople with a sense of invulnerability, but now, for the first time, they were forced to confront the reality that their naval superiority was no longer assured. The Arabs had not just lost ships, they had lost confidence. Greek fire, in a single stroke, had undermined the Arabs' entire strategy. What had once seemed like an inevitable victory for the caliphate was now in jeopardy. The sight of burning ships, the screams of dying sailors, and the unstoppable nature of the fire created a wave of panic that swept through the Arab fleet. As the flames continued to ravage the enemy ships, the Byzantines took advantage of their newfound dominance. Their fleet, though still outnumbered, began to push back against the Arabs with renewed vigor. The Byzantines, emboldened by the success of Greek fire, attacked with precision, using the element of surprise and the psychological effect of their weapon to devastating effect. The Arab fleet, now in disarray, struggled to regroup. Their once proud ships, burning and sinking, were a testament to the power of the Byzantine innovation. The Byzantines, with their smaller fleet, were now able to force the Arabs into retreat.